Good morning, distinguished students of Federal Government College, JSS1 History class. Our topic today is Centralized States in Nigeria before 1800, the Hausa States, presented by Dr. Mrs. Ejimogu Faith. In our last class, we looked at the meaning of centralized states, and we said centralized states are states in which governmental powers are vested in the hands of an individual who is a king, who has absolute authority over a large political unit covering a large towns. Then we looked at the characteristics of centralized states. Then we also saw the examples of centralized states. And if you remember very well, we mentioned Hausa states as one of the centralized states. Now, in our class today, we're going to look at the following objectives. We will make sure we achieve the following objectives. Number 1, tradition of origin. Number 2, socio-political organization of Hausa states. Number 3, introduction of Islam in Hausa states. And then we'll look at the effects of Islam on the Hausa states. Introduction. Now, the word Hausa comes from a Fulani word, which means conquered people, Negro people, or pagans. In other words, the name Hausa was given to the people by the Fulani people, and they use it to refer to people that have been defeated, the Negro people or pagans, those who do not accept their religion. Now, the word Hausa refers to all the people speaking Hausa language who reside in the northern part of Nigeria. Tradition of origin of the Hausa states. Now, the Hausa states were said to have been founded about the 12th century AD. That was when the Hausa states were found. And there are different versions about the tradition of origin, but the most acceptable is the Bayajida or Daura legend. The Bayajida or Daura legend. Now, this tradition speaks of Daura as the heart or the ancestral home of the Hausas. In other words, if the Hausas want to pick on any place as their ancestral home where they originated from, they look at what Daura as their ancestral home. Now, the Hausa states were said to have been founded by Bayajida. Another name for Bayajida is Abu Yazid. Now, Bayajida was the son of the king of Baghdad in Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia is in Asia. Bayajida fled from home. He fled to Borno with his followers. Due to the conflict he had with his father, he left Baghdad and came into Borno. And when he came into Borno, he discovered that the people were finding it difficult to fetch water from the well as a result of a snake or a serpent in the well that prevented the people from fetching water, especially at night. So Bayajida needed to do what? Carve a niche for himself. So what did he do? He went to a blacksmith. A blacksmith is someone who bends metal into different shapes. So he went to a blacksmith to do what? To carve a sword for him. And with that sword, Bayajida went to that well and killed the snake that had long prevented the people from fetching water from that well. Now, in appreciation for what Bayajida did, the queen of Daura married him because she felt he was a brave man. She married him and offered him half of the kingdom. Now, this marriage yielded fruits. Now, the marriage between Bayajida and the queen of Daura produced a son, and the name of that son was Bawo. Now, Bawo got married and gave birth to 7 sons, who founded the 7 Hausa states. Now, these 7 Hausa states are known as the Hausa Bakwa, or the pure Hausa states. And these 7 Hausa states are Daura, Kanu, Ranu, Zaria, also known as Hausa, Katsina, Biram, and Gobai. Now, Bao also had 7 other sons from a concubine. A concubine is when a woman is living with a man that she's not married to. So he had 7 other sons with a concubine, a woman is not married to, known as the Hausa Banza. Those 7 sons are known as Hausa Banza, or illegitimate sons, because their mother was not married. And the name of these sons are called Zamfara, Kebi, Nupe, Gwari, Yauri, Guararafa, and Ilorin. You see Yoruba in brackets because the Ilorin people are Yoruba people. Now, we want to look at the socio-political organization of the Hausa state. Now, at the head of the government in the Hausa state was the Abe rulers, known as the Sake. You remember very well that we said the centralized states are states in which governmental powers are vested in the hand of an individual. Now, in Hausa states, at the head of the government was the Abe rulers, known as Sake. But by the 14th century, what happened? The Fulani jihadis conquered the Hausa states. In other words, the Fulani jihadis came into Hausa land by the 14th century, and what did they do? They conquered the Hausa states. And when they did, what did they do? They introduced a strong and highly centralized state, and that's why the Hausa states is one of the centralized states, like I earlier mentioned. Now, when they established the centralized states, what did they do? They installed emirs. And these emirs became what? Semi-divine king with absolute powers. Now, semi-divine kings, because the emirs were seen as what? A demigod. If you remember our last lesson, they're seen as a demigod with absolute authority, unrestricted power, unrestricted control that cannot be questioned. Now, the emirs did not work alone. They were assisted by a council of ministers. And this council of ministers were appointed, and assignments were given to them by the kings. Now, the first one is the Galadima. The Galadima was in charge of administering the capital city. You remember we said centralized states, the king stayed at the capital city. But he had what? A Galadima who was in charge of the capital city. Number 2, we have the Madawaki. The Madawaki is the commander-in-chief of the cavalry army and took charge of all the military functions in the states. In other words, the Madawaki was in charge of the army. Centralized states, you remember we said in our last class that they fought wars of territorial expansion. Because they fought wars, they had what? A large army. And who was in charge of the army? The Madawaki. So anything that has to do with fighting wars of expansion, expanding the territory, defeating enemies, was under the control of the Madawaki. Then number 3, we have the Waziri. The Waziri was the prime minister of each of these Hausa states. And he was the chief advisor to the emir in administration, the Waziri. Number 4, we have the Magaji. The Magaji. The Magaji is the treasurer. The Magaji is the treasurer or the finance minister. You know, it's very important for every government to have what? The finance minister or the treasurer. Now, in the Hausa states, we have the Magaji. Number 5, we have the Saki Dongaro. Saki Dongaro. He was the head of the king's bodyguard. You know, every king has a bodyguard, and there must be somebody assigned to be the head. In the Hausa state, it was the Saki Dongari, the head of the king's bodyguards. Then we have the Saki Yandoka. He was the chief of police. The chief of police, he was also the town crier. You know, it's very necessary for the king to do what? Pass information around. Who does it? The Saki Yandoka. He is the town crier. And he's also the watchman for the city. He gives information to the king on matters of security. Then following that, we have the Saki Fanda. The Saki Fanda is the head of the palace officials. the head of the palace officials. Now there are palace officials in every kingdom, and somebody must be the head. And when it comes to the Hausa state, the Saki founder was the head of the palace officials. Then we have the Saki Kafa. Saki Kafa, he was the keeper of the gates. You know, the king's gate needs to be guarded, and it was done by the Saki Kafa. Then we have the Yari. The Yari was in charge of prisons. Every kingdom have prisons, so that offenders of the law will be put in prison. Who was in charge in the Hausa states? It was the Yari. And then number 10, we have the Saki Ruwa. The Saki Ruwa was the head of water resources. He was the head of the water resources. And then we have the Saki Puda. He was in charge of meat production in the kingdom. Now, the emirs also had what we call the alkali courts. The alkali courts through which the king dispensed justice. Remember in our last class we said the king had judicial powers. He sits in judgment against offenders of the law. But he doesn't do this alone. He uses the alkali courts through which justice is what? Dispensed. And the alkali courts were headed by the alkalis. These alkalis were trained in Islamic laws. Now our next topic is introduction of Islam in Hausa land. Introduction of Islam in Hausa land. Now the Hausas, like every other people in Nigeria, originally practiced traditional religion. In other words, they worship their ancestors, or some of them worshipped objects. They had objects of worship that they bowed to. That was before the 14th century when Islam was introduced in Hausa land. Now, Islam was introduced in Hausa land during the reign of Saki Yaji Ali, and this was within 1349 to 1385 when that king ruled. Now, who introduced Islam into Hausa land? It was introduced by Wangarawa Muslim missionaries. They are called Wangarawa Muslim missionaries from Mali. They visited Kanu and they converted the king to Islam, and many of his subjects were converted to Islam. And you know what they did? They built a mosque in Kanu. Now, in the course of time, all the 14 Hausa states also were converted to what? Islam. But Katsina was the last to be converted, to accept Islam. However, Islam did not have a strong hold. From time to time, the people relapsed into their traditional religion. Yes, they were practicing Islam, but from time to time, they will go back to the traditional religion. This continued until 1804, when the Fulani jihadists conquered the Hausa states. And I'm sure we must have heard names like Uthman Dan Fodio. That was when the Hausa states was conquered. Now we want to look at the impact or the effect of Islam on the Hausa land. Yes, the Hausa states accepted Islam. What is the effect of Islam on the Hausa states? Number 1, Islam introduced Arabic education and Quranic schools were built. Arabic education was introduced and Quranic schools were built. Now, these Quranic schools were Islamic schools, and of course, they taught the people using the Arabic language. And the Arabic language are language spoken by people from the Arabian world. Saudi Arabia and others, all those Asian countries. So Arabic education was introduced, and then Quranic schools were built based on Islamic concepts, Islamic precepts. In other words, the Quran was read in those schools. It was a major book that was used in those schools, and that's why they are called Quranic schools. Number 2, Arabic culture was imbibed by the Hausa people. Now, the culture we're talking about is the way of life of the Arabic people. The way of life of the Arabic people. Now, they introduced Arabic writing. There's a way the Arabic people write. people from the Arabian countries. There is a way they write different from the way we write. And that writing is called what? Arabic writing. They also have Arabic names. Names like Ibrahim, Muhammad, Ishmael or Ishmaeli, I don't know. They have the ways they pronounce their names. These are Arabic names. Then we also have the Arabic language. I told you these are languages spoken by Arabic countries in the Asian world. Then they also imbibe the Arabic dressing. The Hausa people started dressing like the Arabic people. Like the women wore what we call hijab. You know this covering the Hausa women wear. We call it hijab. Then the men wear what we call turban. They wear turban on their head. This cap they wear on their head. Some will tie wrap around their head. We call it turban, worn by the Hausa men. Then they also started wearing long flowing gown. Remember we said they imbibed the Arabic culture. The women started going into puda. That is, they started going into isolation. They don't come out to the open. They isolate themselves. Then number 3, Islam impacted on the government. Islam impacted on the government. Now, the Hausa kings were now being used as what? Advisors. No, Islamic scholars were used by the Hausa kings as what? Advisors, as counselors, as judges. When they wanted kings, they wanted advice, they used the Islamic scholars. When they wanted to appoint counselors, they used Islamic scholars. When they wanted judges who will adjudicate cases in the alkali courts, who did they use? They used Islamic scholars. Now, these are the impacts of Islam on the Hausa states. Very quickly, before I give you an assignment, I want to quickly go through what we have done. We started by looking at the tradition of origin of the Hausa states. Now, before we did that, we said the Hausa comes from a Fulani word, meaning conquered people, Negro people, or the pagans. Then we went further to say that the Hausas refer to those who speak the Hausa languages, the Hausa language, and they live in the northern part of Nigeria. We looked at the tradition of origin, and we said there are so many versions, but the most acceptable is the Bayajida legend or the Daura legend. And we said it speaks of Bayajida being the founder of the Hausa state. We said he did something very remarkable. He killed a snake in a well that long prevented the people from fetching water. And in appreciation, the queen of Daura did what? Married him and gave him half of the kingdom. They gave back to a son known as Bawo, and Bawo gave back to 14 sons. The first 7 sons were given birth to by his wife. She was married. So they are referred to as the legitimate sons or the Hausa Bakwa or pure Hausa states. And then we now have 7 other sons he gave birth to through a concubine. They are referred to as the Hausa Banza or illegitimate sons. Now these 14 sons spread to form all the Hausa towns and villages we have in existence today. We looked at the socio-political organization, and we said the king was at the top, and then he had officials appointed, and we gave you so many of them. We listed so many of them. Then we looked at Islam in Hausa land. We looked at when Islam was introduced during the 14th century, when the Fulani jihadists came in, or rather the Wagarawa traders came in to introduce Islam from Mali. Then we looked at the impact of Islam. We said they introduced the Arabic education and Quranic skills. They introduced Arabic culture. Then the government was also affected by Islam because Islamic scholars were now used as counselors, advisors, and judges. And then we finally looked at Islamic scholars being used as judges to adjudicate cases in the alkali courts. Thank you very much. Before I go, I'll give you an assignment. And the assignment is lists the states occupied by the Hausa people in present-day Nigeria. I told you that the Hausas occupy the northern part of Nigeria. So identify the states where they occupy in present-day Nigeria. Thank you, and I hope you had a good time. God bless you.